In this video, you'll learn what goes into making this banner. This is a follow-up to my GIMP Essentials video, link in the description. We'll cover a few tools and features that I didn't cover in the Essentials video, which is a bite-sized version of my GIMP Essentials class available on Skillshare. Use the link in the description to get your first month free. With that said, let's get to it. GIMP 3.0 is near, and until then, we'll be working with destructive editing. This workflow here is designed to minimize that, starting with our canvas size or image size. Let's go to the menu bar, File, New. You can set your project to 1080p by 1080p, pixels, 72 dpi, 8-bit. I'll create an 8x8 inches canvas, 300 dpi, 16-bit precision. Besides not having CMYK, this will give me print-ready quality. It's easier to scale down images than it is to scale them up. With that said, think about what you're designing for and your medium. Is it print or digital? So the first thing I'll do is create some guides. There are several ways we could go about this. One of them would be to go to the menu bar, go to Image, down to Guides, and we could create guides by percentage or even drag them in manually. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'll make a selection of my entire canvas. You could also simply Alt left click on the background. Then I'll go to the menu bar, I'll go to Select, I'll go down to Shrink, and with it already in inches, I'll remove 0.25 inches from it, and it's going to remove 0.25 from each corner, so in the end that will be 0.5 inches. All right, and now we can go up to Image, down to Guides, and New Guides from Selection, and there we have it. So now I can select none. All right, so the first thing I'll do is create a layer group, and I'll rename this to background, #1. I'll put the background in there, and then I'll grab the gradient tool, and I'll switch it to radio, and let's set our colors. I'm gonna go with a green, and for the opposite color, it's going to be somewhat of a yellowish bright color. We can always change it on the fly. So I'll click around the middle, more or less, and drag out. I think I want the green to be a little darker, and I'll push the median point a little closer to the inside. All right, press enter to confirm. Next, I'll create a new layer, and I'm gonna call this light spot, I guess, and grab the brush. I'm going to go for a bit closer to a yellow color this time, just as bright. And set the brush to 2000. Get a very large brush. I'm going to go for soft edges. Tap once. Okay, reset my brush. Now with the move tool, I can move this around this corner here. And what I'm going to do is blur this layer. I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Uncheck the clip to the input extent. That way it can blur outside of the size of the layer. I'm really going to increase this value here, more or less. Okay, now I can set this to, let's see, overlay for now. Next, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll call this shape #1. Grab the path tool, let me zoom out a little bit. And now to create this path. Something like this. All right, now I can close off the path, press enter to make a selection. And as for the color, I'm going to look for somewhat of a pinkish salmon maybe. I can change the tone afterwards. So I'll drag this in, more or less. Next, I'll grab the move tool, and we could switch to move selection or simply hold down Ctrl plus Alt or Command plus Alt on a Mac. I'll left click, then I'll release and hold down Ctrl again to move it only on the vertical axis. Now I'm going to invert the selection and lock the alpha channel. This will prevent me from affecting transparency. Now I can make a darker version of this salmon color, salmon-ish, and drop it in there. Select none, and there we have it. We can unlock this if we want to. And finally, I'm going to create one last layer. It's gonna be noise #1. I'm going to fit it up with a neutral gray, go up to filters, noise, HSV noise, increase the value so we can see it a bit, increase the dulling, maybe leave it as it is, more or less, random seed, press OK. And now we can switch this between overlay or soft light. So we have a little bit of texture on the background. I feel like this light is a little strong, so let's go with 70. Dim it down a bit. Now the next thing to do is I'll make another layer. I'll take it outside of the background and I'll call this one bow. Did I spell that right? I'll make another layer as well, and this will be fruits, and put it outside. At this point, I'm going to import the assets. I'll left click, hold, and drag them inside of fruits. I'll place the bow inside of bow. I'll hide the fruits for now, and let's focus on this bowl over here. So zoom in, I'll grab the ellipse tool and start making my selection. Just want to grab the bow. Okay. We don't technically need the information outside of this, so we could apply the mask. And to apply the mask, simply hold down Shift plus Control or Shift plus Command and left click on the thumbnail of the image. Now let's center our bow. So to do so, I'm going to go to Image, Guide, New by Percentage, 50% Vertical. And now if I grab the bow, actually let's crop to the layer. So it's going to be inside of Layer, Crop to Content. And now when I move it, the little crosshair here in the center is the center of our bow. Put it right there, then scale from center. Let's say roughly, scale it around here. Now I can move the bow down as such for now. Well, since we're here, let's go ahead and create a drop shadow for it. So I'm going to hold down Alt, click on the layer so it selects the content. I'll make a new layer. I'll call this shadow #1. Move it under the bow and I'll fill it up with the color black. You can do so by click and dragging this in, or simply press Control and I'll put the symbol on the screen. But it fills it up with the foreground color. Select none, go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Long Shadow. Then I'll switch this to Fading Fixed Length. No, let's go with Fading. Change the color and add a bit of transparency to it, so it's not such a rough shadow. Maybe a bit more transparency. All right, then we can change the angle. And by increasing the midpoint, we're going to get a longer shadow, or a more pronounced shadow. Once we're done, simply press OK. Now I'm going to grab the blur tool, so Shift U. I'm going to increase the strength of the blur all the way, or the rate. Increase my brush size. And with the shadow layer selected, I'm going to blur the edges of the shadow. Clicking and brushing and clicking multiple times. So it's not such sharp edges here for the shadow. Okay, more or less. I'm going to duplicate the bow. I'm going to change the name to bow original. And this is going to be called dodge. So yes, now we're going to go and grab the dodge and burn tool. Gonna go down and choose the highlights. We could simply push up the exposure and then use the mask to select what we want, but I did not show the dodge and burn in the GIMP Essentials tutorial, we could say. So with that done, let's zoom in a bit, and I'm gonna grab a soft brush, significantly soft, pretty big brush. Left click, hold, and I'm going to drag this around a bit, just to brighten the areas I want to brighten. Okay. I'm going to create a layer mask, invert the colors, grab my brush, I'm going to drop the opacity of my brush, and I'm going to lower or paint over this a little bit. You can see how it's becoming a little gray. This is simply because these bananas, or these parts of the bananas, are already so bright. I do not need them to be brighter than they already are. Now, if we notice, we have our drop shadow or long shadow going from the left to the right, but inside of the bowl, the light part is on the left. So it should be the opposite. So I'm going to grab the flip tool. So over here in our transforms, we have flip, and I'm going to flip this. I'm going to flip this top layer as such. And I'll do the same thing with the bottom layer so that the the banana pieces match. I'm going to duplicate this bow and I'm going to call this sharpen. We could use the sharp on sharp, but I'm going to use this method here, going to filter, enhance, high pass. Okay, go to overlay. Let's zoom in here, see what we're doing. Okay, it's adding a little bit of sharpness to it. And I'll drop this to 50. Let's see here. Maybe 75. Okay, so we're done with the bow for now. Now let's move on to the fruits. So this is going to be a time lapse of me cutting out the fruits and masking them. Otherwise, this would be very tedious to watch. So I'll hide the guides. So that's Shift-Control-T, or you can simply go to View and Show Guides or Hide Guides. All right, so I'll be using the Path tool and the Fuzzy Select in order to make these selections. Whichever tool that gets the job done with the most ease. And since the fruits are going to be blurred in the end, there's no need to be extremely precise with them. So for the watermelon, I use the Path tool. For the kiwi and the blueberries, I use the Ellipse Select. For the strawberry, I use the Fuzzy Select tool. And for the banana, the Path tool. Okay, so with all of my fruits cut out and selected, I can now go ahead and place them around the scene. Now with this sort of workflow, you could duplicate the layer group and apply all of the mask in one of them, or just apply the mask if you know that there's nothing to refine in the mask, or you're not going to be grabbing other elements from the images. So in this case, I could do it. We'd be entering a bit more into the destructive side of things, or we could simply not do that. So I'll go ahead and grab my unified transform and start transforming and positioning, scaling and whatnot. All right, once we have our fruits positioned, we can duplicate the layer group. And then over down here in the merge, if you hold down Shift and you click on it, it's going to fuse the layer group into a single image, so we can hide the other one. And now we have our fruits all together. With them selected, I'll go to Filter, Blur, and I'll choose Focus Blur. Now you have multiple options to choose from. I'm simply going with the Focus Blur just to get a bit of a gradient looking blur in a way. Then I'll grab the Lens Blur. This is going to change the kind of blur that we're getting, and I'm going to increase the highlight factor. This is simply going to make the highlight areas a bit shinier, you could say. I'll increase the blur radius just to keep the blur blurred. Okay, and then we can press OK, and there we have it. Now let's jump into our text, our type, if we will. So I'm going to make two new layer groups, and the top one is going to be called title. The bottom one is going to be called information. So I'll start with the information. I'll make two layer groups inside of it, separate them. One of them is going to be order, and the other one contact. Order could be called call to action, but I'll simply call it order. So we'll grab the text tool and pop-ins. Pop-ins heavy. I think that works just fine. I'll probably switch it down to bold. And now let's write order now, all caps. I'll make this smaller and I'll change the color to white. And of course, bold. Heavy is a bit much. All right, press escape to get out of this. So I can drag another guide down here just to help us keep things aligned. So as such, and let's see. All right, I had disabled this. So snap the guides. Let's create a new layer and we can call this button. I'll do button #1, place it under the order now. Let's grab the rectangle tool, and over here we have rounded corners. Check this on so that now when I make my selection, I can increase the radius and we get these nice little rounded corners. For the alignment, I'll align this shortly. So let's just give it a nice amount of breathing room. And for the color, I'm going to go with, well, similar green to what we have for the background. Drop it in there, and I'll make a new layer, and I'll call this shading, #1. You could also call it button shading. I'll revert back to black and white, grab my gradient tool, I'll switch it to linear. I'll go with foreground to transparency. And at the bottom, I'll drag it up a little bit, add some shadow, press enter. Then I'll switch to white and I'll drag it down at the top as such. Okay, now here comes the tricky part. With the selection still active, I'm going to grab the selection, then we can hold down release and then hold down Control to move it, lock it on the vertical axis. I'm going to move this up, grab my eraser tool. I'm going to erase a bit down here. Okay, grab the move tool. Let's grab our selection, move it down this time, grab the eraser, and do the same thing. We're going to erase over here. Careful not to erase the shadow at the bottom. Okay, more or less. With the selection still active, we still want the selection. We can now go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And let's increase the blur here. And there we have it. We can control how it blends by switching it to Overlay, for example. And it gives us a nice little bright button here. Okay, now to make things easier, I'm simply going to duplicate the order button, move it down inside of the contact. Then with the move tool, I'll move this. In the top here, I'm going to write delivery. I'm going to align to the right or right justified, add a line break, and this is going to be +1, 809, 555, 16, 16. There's no point in calling this number, it's not a real number. I'll grab this down here and I'll switch it to medium. I'm going to decrease the line spacing a little bit, just a tiny bit. And I'm gonna move it up so that we're not going below this safe area margin that we set. Let's say like this. And now to change the color, I think I'm gonna grab this green, but maybe a little lighter or darker. Darker will do better. Next, we can jump inside of title. Inside of title, grab the text tool, and here I can write healthy fruit salad. Oops, salad. I will justify center for these. And for the fruit, I'm going to change the font and I'll choose lemon. For healthy, I'll choose impact condense. And I'll do the same for the salad down here. So it's going to be impact condense. Just a point. I'm going to increase the size of our fruit significantly. And for the healthy, we can go a little higher. I'll put the same amount for the salad, which is 32. Now I'm going to reduce the line spacing. Let's say -14, let's see, perfect. And finally change the text back to white. I think I'm gonna move the bowl down so we can grab the layer. You can hold down Shift. Yes, GIMP has this thing where when you first click on a layer, it kind of pushes it to the side. I don't know if this happens with everyone, but this happens to me. Or just use the arrow keys to move it up and down. Okay. Now, there are several ways we can go about transforming or deforming the title. What I'm going to do is going to be the least destructive method, so to speak. And I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call this text. Oops. Text. #1. I'll hold down Alt and left click on the title so we make a selection. And now, let's go to Layer, Text to Path. This will create a path out of our text. And here it is. I'll select none. I'll hide the text for now. Go inside of text 1 and call this title. Now, if I grab the unified transform, I can switch it to path. left click, and now we're transforming the path. So I can skew just the path. I'll hold down Control to skew from the center and give this a little angle, transform. I think that should do it. I'll hide the path, make a selection out of it, and just drop the color white. So we could apply this directly to our text layer, and then that wouldn't be a problem, but I'm using the path for that instead. And now a new layer, and this is going to be shadow #1. I'll move it under the title, select the title, so the outline, fill this with black. You can drag and drop, deselect everything, light and shadow, drop shadow. First thing I'll do is change the color to more of a dark green. Then I'll move it in a bit, reduce the blur radius a little bit, maybe increase the opacity, and then increase the blur. Not so much. Let's say 8. 8 too little, 10. Okay, I think this works. Let's remove the guides, take a look. Maybe I'll move it down. So I'll click on the folder title. Finally, I'll make a new layer group, and this is going to be called decor #1. I'll duplicate it. So what are we doing with this? I'll grab the brush, solid shape. Actually, you know what? This could be decor 1. Let's remove this. A new layer, call it decor #1. And I'll create a dot. So let's get closer to this. I'll create a dot right here. Now I'll grab the warp tool. Let me increase the size a bit. I'm going to increase the hardness and the strength. And we're set to move pixels. And I'm simply going to drag this out in a straight line. Maybe a little bigger. You can simply draw this out with a shape, but I'm doing it this way. Press Enter to confirm. Place this here. I'm going to crop it to content. Use the unified transform. And I'm going to scale it. Hold down Shift to scale on one side. Say this and shear. Yep, this should do it. Now I can duplicate this layer, transform, move the pivot point, rotate, place this here as such. Okay. I'm going to rotate both of these, duplicate. Okay, I think I'm okay with this one. And what I might just do is, let's see, one is the middle one. I'll paint this one green. I'll lock the alpha and simply paint this one green. Now with that done, we can duplicate the decor. So now it's going to become decor 2. I can grab it, I'll move it down here, flip it. And there we have it. Remember to save during your process, because notice I didn't save not even once. So I'll go ahead and save this. There are little refinements that we could do. For example, grabbing the drop shadow and pulling it out a little bit towards the right. Then we can grab the blur tool, give a little bit of blur to this little edge. What we're doing essentially is giving it a darker shadow around the rim, because that's what's closest to the ground. Although this part is not touching it, that's why we can't have or shouldn't have like extremely dark shadows, but it is the closest part. So it would make sense that it would be a little darker. So we're ready to export this. Let's go to File, Export As. Let's name this. So go with fruit salad v1. Now, depending on what you intend to do with this, you can choose the format that you're going to export. So for example, if you're just going for social media, you could go for a JPEG, so you get a lighter file with a minimal amount of loss of quality. You also have PNG if you want to export with a lossless export, so not losing quality, basically lossless. You have PDF if you're going to print, although If you are going to print, you could go with TIFF. Is it one F or two Fs? Let me double check. Let's go down in the file formats, and not GIF, by the way. We're not saying GIF, we're talking TIFF. TIFF is a highly uncompressed format, which basically is ideal for prints. Here we have TIFF format if you're exporting for print. Go to export. No compression, so you're going to get a very heavy file. You can save the layers if necessary, so you could use this for, it could be used for editing layer. We have these options. I'm going to remove these as these contain sensitive information. Export. You can see the image came out to 46 megabytes, whereas if we were to export this as JPEG, let's say we went with 95, right? We're trying to get a little bit of compression. I'm trying to save a little bit of space. 2.3 megabytes. If you were to export it with 90% quality, you would get a smaller file, 1.5, not so bad. Remember, this is 8 by 8 inches, 300 dpi on my side. If this is for print, you can go to View, down to color management, and you have proof colors. Now, of course, you want to have the proof color profile set up in your preferences. So edit, preferences, color management. And over here, we have soft proofing. I have it set to US web quoted swap 2. Perceptual, use black point compression. You could set this to precision, color fidelity. And we have the mark out gamut color. If you check this on, everything that is outside of the gamut is going to basically either turn pink or black on your display. And so I already have my settings set up. This gives you a more accurate representation or a closer representation of what you would get for print. And if you do need to convert this to CMYK, you can save it as a TIFF and then convert it using either Scribus or Krita or even Photoshop or Photo-P. Few things I want to change. We have the shape down here. I'll go to use saturation. I actually want it to be a little lighter, and I'm going to make it a lot more saturated. Lighter and more saturated. This will help the text to stand out as well. And as for the background itself, Shift Control F so we can open the use saturation again. I'll make it slightly darker, a bit more on the green side, as such. You can see how the kiwi is creating this weird tangent the way it's touching. So I can grab the free select, make a selection, Control X, Control J for me, and move this up. Simply merge it back down. This is it on how to create this post. Remember, I have a complete class on how to use GIMP over on Skillshare. You can use the link in the description to get your first month of Skillshare for free. That's one way of supporting the channel and learning a whole bunch about GIMP. Waiting for GIMP 3.0 before I dive into more GIMP content.